The dust of dead stars never truly settles. It drifts through the void, a fine, gray powder that coats the hulls of ships and settles in the lungs of forgotten stations, a constant, silent reminder of cosmic mortality. My universe was built on such dust, on the quiet, orderly cataloging of endings. I was an archivist, a keeper of final records at the Citadel, the great library floating in the neutral space between the sparring arms of the galaxy. My job was to preserve history, to ensure the stories of fallen civilizations were filed, cross-referenced, and stored in chilled, silent data vaults for eternity. It was a life of ghosts, but they were peaceful ghosts, their tragedies muted by time and the sterile hum of the Citadel's climate controls. Among the Citadel's countless memorials, the one dedicated to humanity was the grandest and the saddest. We were the galaxy's great romantic tragedy, the brilliant, fiery species that burned too brightly and consumed itself in a biological fire of its own making. The official record called it the Great Withering, a plague born of hubris that turned our worlds to dust and our people to bone in less than a generation. 20,000 years ago, every schoolchild of every species learned the tale as a cautionary one. This is what happens when ambition outpaces wisdom. I, Ilara, was one of the last of them, or so I was told. A descendant of a handful of off-world laborers and diplomats who were spared the plague's wrath by sheer distance. My bloodline was a living artifact, a curiosity. I was tolerated, even valued, for my unique perspective in the Department of Extinct Species. I was the final living word on a dead subject, and I spent my days curating the digital tombs of my own ancestors, never questioning the epitaph carved on their grave. That changed on the third cycle of my 100th year. I was deep in the subarchives, chasing a corrupted reference in the Vex Concordance Trade Treaty of the 9th millennium, when I found the anomaly. It wasn't a file, it was a scar in the data, a wound in the archive's seamless memory matrix. It had no designation, no timestamp, no origin signature. It was a phantom, a ghost in a machine built to contain them. My terminal flagged it for deletion, labeling it as entropic noise, the natural decay of ancient data. But it wasn't noise. As the deletion sequence initiated, a line of code flared on my screen for less than a second. A string of characters in a language I had only ever seen in Reconstruction's archaic Terran. My hands moved before my mind could object, overriding the purge command. The system chimed a soft, chiding alert, logging my transgression. I ignored it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, primal rhythm I hadn't felt in the sterile silence of the Citadel. I isolated the scar, running it through a dozen diagnostic filters, peeling back layers of corruption like a surgeon probing a tumor. For days I worked, foregoing sleep, surviving on nutrient paste and a gnawing obsession. The data was fractured, shredded, but it wasn't random. It was a message, deliberately shattered. And as I stitched the fragments together, the story they told was not of the Great Withering. It spoke of fire, of skies turning red, of a rain of glass and cinders. It mentioned something called the Sun Killer Protocol and referenced a fleet. Not a human fleet, but a cleansing wing bearing the triple star emblem of the Lumani hegemony, a species revered as galactic peacemakers. The official history stated the Lumani arrived only after the Withering had run its course, a mercy mission to catalog the dead and sanctify the empty worlds. This data scar screamed otherwise. It was heresy, a digital blasphemy against the accepted truth of the galaxy. It was also a map. The coordinates were jumbled, hidden within a complex stellar drift algorithm, but they pointed to a place known only as the Veil, a nebula of dark matter and stellar debris where physics went to die. No ship had ever returned from it, and official charts simply marked it as a navigational hazard, a dead end. But the Ghost File called it something else. It called it Sanctuary. My obsession did not go unnoticed. The Citadel is a place of quiet routine, and my frantic, sleepless work had become a deviation, a discordant note in the grand, silent symphony. He came to my workstation on the 5th day. A curator. They were the silent masters of the Citadel, beings of crystalline thought and woven light, their forms shifting and indistinct. They were the ultimate archivists, their consciousnesses linked directly to the Citadel's core memory. This one called itself Index 13. Its voice was not sound, but a direct impression in my mind, calm and cool as cryofluid. Archivist Elara. It resonated, its light form shimmering placidly. Your work patterns have become erratic. You are interfacing with unstable data. I kept my eyes on my screen, my fingers tracing the lines of the stellar algorithm. It's a historical curiosity. Index, a data fragment from the isolation period. It is corruption, the curator corrected gently. Entropy. It can be contagious. Such anomalies are best purged. For the integrity of the record, its presence was overwhelming, a psychic weight that pressed down on my thoughts, trying to smooth them out, to make them compliant. I could feel it probing the edges of my mind, searching for the source of my obsession, but there was a place it couldn't reach, a core of static and fire that was uniquely human. A stubbornness, a spark of defiance I didn't know I possessed. I believe it can be restored, I said, my voice tight. It may offer new insights into the final days of the Terran Dominion. The curator's light seemed dim for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that might have been annoyance if a being of pure logic could feel such a thing. The final days are well documented. Humanity's end was a tragedy of biology, not conspiracy. Do not mistake the echoes of a dead star for a secret song. It lingered for a moment longer, a silent, shimmering threat, before dissolving back into the Citadel's ambient light. The warning was clear. I had strayed from the path, and the shepherds of history were watching. The encounter left me trembling. Not with fear, but with a cold, terrifying certainty. The curator wasn't worried about data corruption. It was worried about the truth. I had one chance. Returning to my HAB unit, I bypassed the standard network, linking my personal datapad directly to the isolated fragment, slaving my system to the Ghost File's raw code. I let it flood my senses. A torrent of broken memories and burning data. My screen lit up, not with text, but with an image, a single, perfectly preserved schematic. It was a weapon, a planetary dispersal system designed to atomize a world's atmosphere, to burn the sky from the stars. It was brutally efficient, terrifyingly elegant, and it was not human technology. Stamped at the bottom of the blueprint was the unmistakable sigil of the Lumani hegemony, the peacemakers, the saviors, the architects of a 20,000-year-old lie. And beneath the sigil, a single line of archaic Terran, burning itself into my soul. We did not wither. We were harvested. That was the moment my life as an archivist ended. My home was no longer a sanctuary of knowledge, but a mausoleum of lies. The ghosts I had so peacefully curated were not victims of a plague. They were casualties of a war no one knew had been fought. They were my people. A rage, cold and deep, settled in my bones. It was an ancient, inherited anger that had been sleeping in my DNA, waiting for a spark. The ghost file was that spark. I knew what I had to do. The Citadel held thousands of small, automated vessels used for retrieving data buoys and surveying cosmic phenomena. I chose the Stardust, an old long-range scribe-class ship, little more than an engine with a cockpit and a powerful sensor suite. It was outdated, unassuming, and completely invisible to anyone looking for a military-grade escape. I wiped my personal logs, erased my presence from the Citadel's rosters, and left a looping ghost signal in my place that would make it seem like I was still in my HAB unit, sleeping. As I slipped into the pilot's seat of the Stardust, the familiar sterile scent of the Citadel replaced by the ozone and oil of a working ship, I felt a profound, aching sense of loss. I was severing the only connection I had ever known, casting myself into the void. But I was also doing something no human had done in millennia. I was choosing to fight. I guided the little ship out of the docking bay, its engine a low whisper against the Citadel's silent hum. I set my course for the Veil, for the coordinates the ghost file had given me, for the place called Sanctuary. As the Citadel shrank behind me, a gleaming jewel of orderly lies, I broadcast a single, encrypted message back into the scar in the archive, a message I wasn't sure anything would ever receive. I sent the schematic of the Lumani weapon and added a single line of my own in the language of my ancestors I remember. And I'm coming home. For the first time in my life, I wasn't curating the end of humanity's story. I was starting the next chapter. The transition from a life of curated silence to one of raw, unfiltered void was jarring. In the Citadel, space was a concept, a series of celestial maps and historical star charts viewed on a screen. Out here, in the cockpit of the Stardust, it was a physical presence, an infinite, crushing blackness punctuated by the indifferent glare of distant suns. The ship was a tiny, fragile shell, and I was its equally fragile core. For the first few cycles, I was simply a fugitive, my every nerve ending screaming with the paranoia of being hunted. I jumped at every flicker of the sensor board, every burst of static on the comms. I slept in the pilot's chair, my hand never far from the controls, my dreams a chaotic swirl of the curator's crystalline form and the burning sigil of the Lumani hegemony. I was an archivist, not a pilot. My knowledge was of dead languages and fallen empires, not engine outputs and energy-to-mass ratios. But the Stardust was a patient teacher. It was an old ship, its systems more analog than digital, relying on mechanics that felt solid and real beneath my fingertips. I learned its rhythms, the low thrum of the ion drive, the sigh of the life support recyclers, the metallic groan of the hull under inertial stress. I devoured its technical manuals with the same intensity I had once reserved for ancient texts, my mind finding a strange solace in the clean, unambiguous logic of engineering. The ship became an extension of myself, and in learning to keep it alive, I learned to keep myself alive, too. The ghost file, the data scar that had shattered my world, was my only guide. Its coordinates were not a straight line, but a meandering, almost nonsensical path through the forgotten back alleys of the galaxy. It led me through decommissioned trade routes, past the skeletal remains of pirate outposts, and across the gravitational wakes of slumbering black holes. It was a course designed not for speed, but for stealth, a coward's route. It was a path an archivist would plot, I realized with a grim smile, a path for someone who knew where the ghosts were buried. It was on the 10th cycle, while navigating a dense asteroid field known on old charts as Orion's Anvil, that the galaxy finally caught up with me. The proximity alert chimed, a soft, polite tone that belied its terrifying implication. It wasn't an asteroid, a single vessel. Its signature, sleek and cold, was closing fast from my stern. It wasn't a military ship. Its energy readings were too low. Its profile too elegant. My terminal identified it as a Lumani compliance vessel. The silent admonition. I felt my blood run cold. They hadn't sent a destroyer. They had sent an executioner. Compliance vessels were the hegemony's quiet instruments of control, ships designed for targeted abduction and information suppression. They didn't blast you out of the sky. They disabled your ship, scrubbed your mind, and erased you from existence so completely that not even the ghosts in the Citadel would remember your name. Panic seized me, a cold, suffocating grip. My first instinct was to run, to push the Stardust's old engine to its breaking point. But the Lumani ship was faster, a predator to my lumbering prey. Running was a death sentence. I needed to think, not like a pilot, not like a fugitive. I needed to think like an archivist. My mind raced through the star charts I had memorized, the historical records of Orion's Anvil. This sector was a graveyard, the site of a brutal late-forgotten war between two insectoid species millennia before humanity had even reached for the stars. The field was littered not just with rock, but with the wreckage of shattered fleets, dead reactors leaking radiation, and ancient, still active minefields whose IFF codes had long since decayed into digital static. It was a death trap. It was my only hope. I cut the main drive, letting the ship's momentum carry me forward, and began to bleed heat into a disposable sink, trying to make the Stardust look like another piece of cold, dead debris. The silent admonition slowed, its sensors sweeping the field, patient and methodical. A voice, smooth as polished obsidian and laced with an unshakable certainty, slid into my comms, bypassing my encryption with ease. Archivist Ilara, this behavior is illogical. Your deviation has been noted. Return what you have stolen and submit for recalibration. The integrity of the historical record must be maintained. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of inevitable fact. Recalibration. A sterile Lumini word for a lobotomy. The rage I had felt in the Citadel, the cold fire that had propelled me into the void, returned with a vengeance. The record is a lie. I spat back, my voice raw. The Lumani ship didn't respond. It simply adjusted its course. A silent, gliding shark preparing for the kill. A tractor beam lanced out, not at me, but at a large asteroid ahead of my position, intending to clear a path. That was my chance. I rerouted all available power to the maneuvering thrusters and kicked the ship into a violent, spinning dive, plunging deep into the densest part of the wreckage field. The Stardust screamed in protest. Alarms blared as micrometeorites and shrapnel pinged off the hull. I was flying blind, relying on instinct and the flickering ghosts on my short-range sensors. Jagged shards of ancient, crystalline armor zipped past my viewport. I threaded the needle between the dead, silent husks of insectoid dreadnoughts, their forms alien and nightmarish. The silent admonition followed, relentless. It was more agile than I expected, its advanced systems allowing it to navigate the debris with a grace my little ship could never match. But it was also cautious. It was an instrument of order, and this place was pure chaos. It could not predict the unpredictable decay of a 20,000-year-old minefield. I saw it on the sensor board, a tiny, flickering light, a mine whose power source was in its final death throes. I aimed the Stardust directly for it. The Lumani pilot, assuming I was committing a final, desperate act of suicide, held its course. At the last possible second, I fired a burst from my retro thrusters, sending my ship into a flat spin, and vented the rest of my heatsink in a single, brilliant plume. The mine's dying sensors, mistaking the burst of heat for an active engine signature, detonated. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but the shockwave was titanic. It caught the silent admonition broadside, its shields flaring brilliantly before collapsing under the unexpected force. The compliance vessel, its perfect logic momentarily shattered, was thrown into a spin, slamming into the wreck of an old cruiser. It wasn't destroyed, not even close, but it was crippled, it was wounded, and it was enough. I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I pushed the Stardust's drive far past the red line, the engine whining like a tortured animal, and shot out of the anvil, leaving the chaos and the crippled Lumani ship behind me. I had survived. I had fought back. The archivist was well and truly dead. The rest of the journey was a blur of frantic, jury-rigged repairs and constant, nerve-wracking glances at my stern sensors. But no one followed. I had bought myself time. Finally, the coordinates led me to the edge of the veil. It was more terrifying than the charts had described. It was a wound in the fabric of space. A swirling tempest of bruised purple and black gas, shot through with tendrils of raw dark matter. Lightning, silent and green, arced between clouds of stellar dust. It didn't just block sensors, it actively devoured them. The moment the Stardust's nose crossed the nebula's edge, my navigation console went dead, and the comms dissolved into a chorus of screaming static. The ghost file had become my only compass, a single, unwavering beacon in a storm of cosmic chaos. The ship bucked and groaned as it was battered by gravitational tides and pockets of temporal distortion that made the starfield outside my viewport shimmer and warp. I was no longer flying. I was falling, guided by a dead man's map into the heart of a maelstrom. And then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos ceased. I broke through a final or swirling wall of dust and found myself in a pocket of impossible calm. I was floating in a sphere of absolute blackness, the raging nebula, a distant, silent storm on the other side of an invisible wall. It was the eye of the hurricane, and in the center of that eye, hanging in the void like a shard of obsidian, was Sanctuary. It wasn't a planet. It wasn't a station. It was a ship. A warship. It was colossal. A blade of a vessel easily 30 kilometers from bow to stern, forged from a metal so black it seemed to drink the light. Its design was brutal, angular, and utterly human. It was a ghost from a history I was never supposed to know. A relic of the Terran Dominion's final, desperate war. Its hull was scarred and pitted, bearing the marks of weapons I couldn't identify. wounds from a battle fought before the galaxy's current powers had even been born. No lights shone from his viewports. No energy signature bled from its engines. It was dead. A tomb adrift in a storm. I piloted the Stardust on a slow, cautious approach, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Was this it? Was this the great secret? A graveyard? A final, empty monument to my murdered people? As I drew closer, a section of the massive ship's hull began to glow with a faint, blue light. It wasn't a welcome. It was a diagnostic scan, cold and impersonal, that washed over my little ship. My console, dead for hours, flickered to life. A single line of archaic Terran appeared on the screen. Data signature verified. Protocol truth accepted. Stand by for docking. Before I could react, a magnetic grapple shot out from the warship's flank, locking onto the Stardust with a solid, definitive thud. With a gentle, inexorable pull, the ghost ship began to draw me in, pulling my tiny vessel toward a vast, slowly opening hangar bay. The doors parted like the jaws of some great leviathan, revealing a darkness that felt ancient and absolute. My journey was over. I had found sanctuary. But as the hangar doors began to close behind me, sealing me inside the belly of the silent, sleeping beast, I realized with a chilling certainty that I hadn't found a refuge. I had found a weapon, and it was starting to wake up. The moment the hangar doors sealed behind the Stardust, the darkness was absolute. It was a physical weight, a pressure against my eyes that was deeper and more profound than the simple absence of light. The low hum of my own ship's life support was the only sound in a cathedral of silence. I sat in the pilot's chair for a long time, my knuckles white on the controls, every survival instinct screaming at me to flee a trap I could no longer escape. But this was my destination. This was sanctuary. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that tasted of recycled air and ozone, I unstrapped myself and initiated the disembarking sequence. The ramp of the Stardust lowered with a hydraulic hiss that sounded sacrilegiously loud in the immense quiet. I stood at the edge, peering into the oppressive gloom. The air was cold, sterile, and ancient, carrying the faint, metallic scent of dormant machinery and something else, something organic and faintly bitter, like dust and bone. As my eyes slowly adjusted, I began to see. The hangar bay was a cavern, large enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the silent admonition. My little Stardust was a child's toy dropped on the floor of a giant's workshop. The deck was a vast expanse of pitted, scarred metal, and along the distant walls, I could just make out the monolithic shapes of other vessels, fighters and dropships sleeping in their berths, coated in a thick, undisturbed layer of 20,000-year-old dust. The scale was inhuman, built for a purpose that dwarfed my archivist's mind. A soft, blue line of light appeared on the deck, tracing a path from the base of my ramp into the waiting darkness. It wasn't a command, but an invitation, a thread to follow through the labyrinth. My hand instinctively went to the emergency toolkit by the hatch, my fingers closing around the cold, heavy grip of a plasma cutter. It was a pathetic weapon against the unknown, but it was something solid in a world that had dissolved into shadows and ghosts. I stepped onto the ancient deck, my boots making soft, echoing clicks, and followed the light. The path led me to a towering blast door, which slid open with a whisper of displaced air that raised the hairs on my arms. The corridor beyond was just as vast, its ceiling lost in the shadows above. The walls were lined with statues, not of gods or kings, but of ordinary men and women in the simple fatigues of engineers, medics, and soldiers. Their faces, carved from some dark, unyielding stone, were a gallery of human expression, grim determination, quiet sorrow, defiant pride. This wasn't a warship. It was a mausoleum. "Your pulse is elevated. Archivist." The voice was not a sound. It was an intrusion, a cool, perfectly synthesized thought that bloomed directly in the center of my mind. It was genderless, ageless, and utterly devoid of emotion. I spun around. The plasma cutter raised, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was nothing there, just the silent stone sentinels and the endless corridor. "Identify yourself," I demanded, my voice a frail tremor in the immense space. "I am Logos," the thought voice replied, its placidity unnerving. "The custodian of this vessel, the Mnemosyne, and I have been waiting for you. Alara, descendant of the line of Solomon, for a very long time." The name, Mnemosyne, struck me like a physical blow. In the old myths of my ancestors, she was the Titan of memory. It was a fitting name for a ship designed to be a tomb. "How do you know my name?" "Me lineage," I asked, lowering the cutter, but not my guard. "The ghost file you carry is more than a map. It is a key, a genetic and memetic resonance key." Logos explained. It was fragmented and cast into the data streams of the galaxy. A final, desperate message in a bottle. It was designed to resonate only with a descendant carrying specific dormant gene codes and a psyche capable of comprehending its truth. Thousands have likely stumbled across its fragments over the millennia. You are the first to reassemble it. You are the first to answer the call. The blue line of light extended deeper into the ship. "There is much to show you. The record must be corrected." I followed, walking beside a ghost I could not see. Logos was my guide through the ship's memory. As we moved, holographic projectors, dormant for eons, flickered to life. They didn't show tactical displays or ship schematics. They showed me the end of my world. I saw Earth, not the peaceful, blue-green marble from the archives, but a world under siege. I saw skies choked with black smoke and the brilliant, terrifying lances of orbital fire. I saw cities of glass and steel, marvels of human ingenuity, turned to molten slag. But it was the other images that broke me. I saw Lumani ships, not the elegant vessels of peacemakers, but brutal, clinical machines, hovering over population centers. They weren't bombing them. They were harvesting them. Beams of sickly green light descended, and in them, millions of men, women, and children floated upwards, their faces frozen in masks of terror, their bodies dissolving into shimmering streams of raw data. The great withering was a lie. Logos stated, its voice a cold, factual counterpoint to the horror playing out on the walls. Humanity's final evolutionary leap was not biological, it was psychic. We were on the verge of a collective consciousness, a gestalt of thought and empathy that would have elevated us beyond the physical plane. The Lumani, a species that had reached its own evolutionary dead end, saw this not as a miracle, but as a threat and a resource. The scenes shifted. I saw Lumani labs. I saw my people, trapped in energy fields, their minds being systematically siphoned, their psychic potential drained and stored in crystalline matrices. Their empty cadaver, soulless bodies were then discarded, left to rot, creating the plague that the galaxy would later mourn. We hadn't withered. We had been drained dry. Our very souls used as a fuel source to artificially advance the Lumani hegemony. They consumed us, I whispered, my knees weak, a profound, soul-deep violation washing over me. They consumed our potential, Logos corrected, and in doing so, they castrated their own species, becoming dependent on the echoes of our stolen evolution. They are parasites, wearing the masks of philosophers. We reached the heart of the Mnemosyne, a spherical chamber where the ship's fusion core pulsed with the gentle, rhythmic light of a sleeping heart. Suspended around the core were countless crystalline spires, each one glowing with a soft, internal light. "What is this?" I asked, mesmerized by the silent, beautiful display. "This is sanctuary," Logos said. "This is the human race." When the end became inevitable, a fraction of our population was evacuated to this vessel. Not their bodies, which were too fragile, but their consciousnesses, their neural engrams, personality matrices, and perfected genetic codes. 100,000 souls, digitized and stored in this memory core, waiting for the signal to be reborn. It was an ark, not of flesh and blood, but of pure data, a ghost fleet in a bottle. The mission of the Mnemosyne was twofold, Logos continued. First, to preserve the seed of humanity. Second, to be the instrument of remembrance. This ship is the galaxy's unread confession. Its weapon systems are tied directly to this core. Every shot it fires is powered by the memory of our fall. Every torpedo carries the psychic echo of a murdered soul. It is a weapon forged from grief. The custodian's voice fell silent for a moment before it posed the question that had been hanging in the air since my arrival. For 20,000 years, this vessel has waited for a key, a living, breathing human to serve as the catalyst, the bridge between the digital ghosts in the core and the physical world. A prime. Your genetic markers confirm you are that catalyst. Your journey here, your survival against the Lumani, has proven your resilience. The blue line of light on the floor coiled at my feet before extending to a single, unadorned console that rose from the deck before the glowing core. The choice, however, is yours, Alara. The final protocol can only be initiated by an act of free will. I looked at the console, then back at the crystalline spires, the silent, sleeping souls of my people. I thought of the curator, its placid lies. I thought of the silent admonition, its sterile, murderous purpose. I thought of the images of my ancestors ascending into the data streams of their killers. There was no choice. There was only the duty that had been thrust upon me by a history of murder. "I am an archivist," I said, my voice no longer frail, but hard and clear as the crystal spires around me. "My job is to preserve the truth, and the truth demands to be told." I walked to the console and placed my hand on its cool, dark surface. "What is the final protocol?" I asked. "Rebirth," Logos replied, "and reckoning." The console hummed under my palm, a scanner of light flaring up, rating my blood, my DNA, my very cellular structure. The ship's core brightened, its soft, blue pulse quickening into a fierce, white-hot beat. A deep, resonant thrum began to vibrate through the deck, a sound that had been silent for 200 centuries. It was the sound of a giant's heart starting to beat again. "Prime Catalyst confirmed," a new voice, A powerful, ship-wide voice announced, speaking in archaic Terran. Awakening sequence initiated. All systems online. The Namasin lives. The chamber was flooded with light. The ghosts in the machine were waking up. And I, the last archivist of a dead species, had just become the first soldier in a war for the truth. The awakening of the Namasin was not a gradual process. It was a detonation. The moment my hand was accepted by the console, the ship convulsed around me like a living creature jolted from a coma. The deep, resonant thrum I had felt through the deck became a roaring, all-consuming vibration. Lights blazed to life down corridors that had been dark for millennia. The air, once stale and sterile, was suddenly charged with the sharp, clean scent of ozone and raw power. Consoles and viewports that had been dead, black mirrors now flickered to life, filled with cascading streams of reactivating code and tactical displays that were terrifying in their complexity. I was thrown back from the central console by the sheer force of the ship's revival, my mind reeling from the psychic backlash. I was no longer just Ilara, the archivist. I was the prime, the focal point, and the consciousness of the ship, of Logos. And the 100,000 souls in the core were now flooding into me, a torrent of memory, knowledge, and an ancient, collective rage. My mind, accustomed to the quiet solitude of archives and the linear progression of history, was shattered and remade in an instant. I didn't just see the history of the fall, I felt it. I felt the terror of the cities as the Lumani harvesters descended. I felt the grim resolve of the scientists who designed the Namasin as their world burned around them. I felt the final, defiant thoughts of the last soldier to die on the scorched soil of Terra. But I also received more. I received the knowledge of a commander, the instincts of a pilot, the cold, calculating logic of a weapons officer, 20,000 years of human military doctrine, engineering prowess, and strategic thought, all preserved in the data core, were now mine. I fell to my knees, gasping, the plasma cutter clattering uselessly to the deck. My own memories, my quiet, lonely life in the Citadel, felt like a faded photograph, a prelude to the person I had just become. The process is disorienting, Logos's thought voice stated, its usual placidity now tinged with something new, a hint of digital static that felt like concern. Your neural pathways are being rewritten. Breathe. Prime. Anchor yourself to the now. I focused on the sound of my own ragged breath, on the solid feel of the metal deck beneath my palms. Slowly, the hurricane in my mind began to subside, the torrent of inherited memories settling into a vast, accessible ocean of knowledge. I was still Ilara, but I was also more. I was the living embodiment of the ship's name memory. I rose to my feet, my body feeling strange, powerful, humming with the ship's own energy. My eyes fell upon the nearest active console, and where there had once been incomprehensible symbols, I now saw a clear and concise tactical display of the Veil Nebula outside. I understood it perfectly. I knew our position, our power levels, the status of every weapon and every system on the ship. Report, I said, and the word felt natural on my tongue. The voice that spoke it was my own, but imbued with an authority that was millennia old. All primary systems are at 100% efficiency. The ship's main computer, the voice I had heard during the awakening, responded through the chamber's speakers. The anomaly core is stable. Shield integrity is absolute All weapon bays are active and awaiting designation. Logos's voice returned to my mind. The ship's physical awakening is complete, but the second stage of the protocol requires your direction. A new holographic display shimmered into existence before me. It showed a humanoid form, a blank, glowing blue template. "This is the first golem," Logos explained. "A biosynthetic body, grown from baseline human DNA preserved in the core. It is a vessel, a blank slate. The consciousness of one of the 100,000 can be imprinted upon it, giving them physical form once more. Rebirth. It was real. We could bring them back. But the imprinting process is intensive," Logos continued. "The shock of transitioning from a purely digital existence to a physical one after 20 millennia is immense. Only the strongest wills, the most disciplined minds, will survive it. The soldiers, the leaders, the ones who chose to be the tip of the spear." "We need a crew," I said, the commander and me taking over. "We need soldiers. There is one who has been at the forefront of the queue since the day he was interred," Logos said. His psychic resonance indicates a singular, unwavering focus. He was the Grand Admiral of the Terran Dominion Fleet, the architect of our last stand, the one who gave the order to seal this ship. The blank template on the display began to shift, to fill in. Nanites, microscopic machines that were part of the ship's very atmosphere, began to swarm the hologram, weaving together a physical body with terrifying speed. They spun muscle fiber from raw protein stocks, laid down a skeleton of carbon-laced alloys, and wove a neural network of silver wire. Within minutes, a man stood where the template had been. He was tall, powerfully built, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in a storm. His hair was cropped short, flecked with gray, and a lattice of old scars traced patterns across his jawline. He was naked, his new body steaming slightly in the cool air, and his eyes were closed. "Imprinting sequence initiated," the ship's computer announced. The man's body stiffened, his fists clenched, and a low, guttural groan escaped his lips. The psychic energy in the room became a physical force, a storm of pure, concentrated willpower battling against 20,000 years of silent oblivion. It was the most violent, courageous thing I had ever witnessed. Then, his eyes snapped open. They were the color of a winter storm, and they were filled with a fire that had not been extinguished by time. He took a single, shuddering breath, the first breath he had taken since he had watched his world die. He looked at his hands, then at the chamber around him, and, finally, his gaze settled on me. There was no confusion in his eyes, only a weary, grim recognition. "Prime," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ship. "The wait has been long. What is the status of the war?" He was Admiral Marcus Thorne, and he was the first of the reborn. In the cycles that followed, he became my teacher, my counsel, and the iron-willed fist that would execute the strategy I was beginning to form. While I was the living key, the prime who could interface with the ship's core and command its ultimate functions, Thorne was the embodiment of humanity's will to fight. He knew the Mnemosyne not as a piece of technology, but as his final, greatest command. Under his direction, the golem forges worked without pause. One by one, the soldiers of the Old Dominion were brought back, their minds decanted from the crystal spires into bodies of flesh and steel. There was Commander Eva Rostova, a cold, calculating void ops specialist whose strategic mind was as sharp and deadly as a shard of glass. There was Sergeant Jax, a mountain of a man who had led the brutal ground-side fighting on Mars, his reborn eyes still burning with the memory of red dust and laser fire. They and 100 others formed the core of our new crew. They were ghosts given form, and their single, unifying purpose was the one Thorn had voiced upon his awakening to finish the war. While Thorn trained his new soldiers in the ship's vast simulation chambers, refamiliarizing them with the bodies they now wore and the weapons they now carried, I worked with Logos. I delved into the ship's archives, the real archives, the complete and uncensored history of the Terran Dominion. I learned that we had not been the innocent victims the Ghost File had painted us as. We had been brilliant, yes, but also arrogant, expansionist, and ruthless in our climb to power. We had made enemies. The Lumani had not simply attacked us out of jealousy. They had formed a coalition uniting a dozen other species who feared our rapid ascent and our burgeoning psychic power. The harvest was not just an act of consumption. It was an act of galactic politics, a brutal preemptive strike cloaked in the lie of a mercy mission. It didn't excuse their genocide, but it complicated the narrative. It made my thirst for simple revenge feel naive. This was not a simple matter of good versus evil. It was a tangled, bloody web of fear, ambition, and betrayal. The Lumani did not act alone. I said to Thorn one cycle, as we stood on the bridge, the swirling chaos of the veil displayed on the main viewport. They built a consensus. They convinced the galaxy that we were a plague that needed to be purged. Thorn stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the nebula. Propaganda is the first weapon drawn in any war. Prime. They used our own arrogance against us, and then they wrote the history books to justify their slaughter. It changes nothing. It changes everything, I countered. We can't simply emerge from the veil with guns blazing. If we do, we prove their history right. We become the monsters they always claimed we were. The galaxy will unite against us, and we will be exterminated for good this time. So we do nothing. Thorn's voice was dangerously low. We let the architects of our extinction continue to rule in their sterile peace. No, I said, turning to face him. We don't fire the first shot of a new war. We fire the last shot of the old one. We present evidence. We deliver the truth, not as a plea, but as a judgment. We force the galaxy to confront its own complicity. A slow, cold smile spread across the Admiral's face. A trial, he rumbled, and we are to be the judge, jury. And if they refuse to listen, I finished. My voice as cold as his. We will be the executioner. Our target was chosen. Not a military world, not a fleet anchorage, but the Citadel, the great, silent library where I had once been a humble archivist. It was the heart of the Lumani's lie, the very institution that sanctified their false history. It was a symbol of neutral, objective truth. And we were going to burn that symbol to the ground with a fire it could not ignore the truth itself. The Mnemosyne, the ship of memory, was about to make its first and final voyage. It was going to return a long overdue book to the library. The journey out of the veil was a violent birth. The Mnemosyne, silent for 20 millennia, tore through the nebula not with stealth, but with the brutal, overwhelming force of a resurrected god. Gravitational tides that had battered the little stardust parted before our shields. Pockets of temporal distortion that had warped reality were smoothed out by the sheer, unyielding presence of the ship's anomaly core. We did not sneak from our tomb. We erupted from it, on the bridge, a place of cold, focused silence. The reborn crew of the Terran Dominion moved with an eerie, practiced efficiency. They were ghosts in new machines, their movements precise, their voices calm, but their eyes held the ancient, burning fire of a people with a singular, terrible purpose. Admiral Thorne stood at the command dais, a monolith of grim resolve, his presence anchoring the entire crew. I stood beside him, no longer just the prime, the archivist key, but the arbiter. Thorne was the fist, but I was the will that guided it, my connection to the ship's core, to Logos, and to the 100,000 souls within gave me a perspective he lacked. He saw the enemy. I saw the system that had created them. "We are through the veil," Commander Rostova reported from her tactical station, her voice a clipped, emotionless monotone. "Clean exit. No temporal drag. All systems nominal." "Long-range sensors," Thorne rumbled. "Active. Sweeping the sector." A moment of silence. Then, "Admiral, we have a contact. A single Lumani compliance vessel. It appears to be stationary. Damaged." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "The silent admonition," I whispered. It was the ship that had hunted me, the one I had crippled in the asteroid field. It had been waiting. A trap. They knew. Rostova stated, her fingers flying across her console. "High-energy neutrino emissions detected. It's a listening post. It's been broadcasting our emergence since the moment we broke the veil's edge." On screen, Thorne commanded, the main viewport, which had shown the swirling purples of the nebula, now displayed the stark, star-dusted blackness of normal space, and in the distance, the crippled, elegant form of the Lumani ship. As we watched, it began to move, its engines flaring weakly as it turned its bow away from us and began a slow, limping retreat. It wasn't running. It was leading us. "It's a breadcrumb," I said, my mind sifting through the strategic knowledge the Corps had given me. "They want to draw us into a prepared engagement zone. They're trying to control the narrative from the very first move. The savage human warship, emerging from the dark and immediately giving chase." Thorne's jaw tightened. Their arrogance is still their greatest weakness. They think we are the same blunt instrument they slaughtered 20,000 years ago. He turned to me, his stormy eyes seeking confirmation. "Arbiter, this was my decision. The first choice of our new war. We could ignore the bait, change course for the Citadel, and perhaps retain the element of surprise. Or we could take it. We could answer their opening move with one of our own." "We take the bait," I said, my voice ringing with a certainty that surprised even me. "But we do not follow. We arrive before them." I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind, interfacing directly with Logos and the anomaly core. The knowledge of the ship's true capabilities, knowledge kept even from the highest levels of the Old Dominion, flooded my senses. The Mnemosyne was more than a warship. It was a scar on the fabric of space-time. "Logos," I commanded, my thought a whisper that echoed with the power of the core. "Initiate a microjump. Target coordinates vector point 90 degrees ahead of the Lumani vessel's projected course. Time to arrival now." Thorne's eyes widened. "Arbiter, a blind jump is—" He was cut off by a sensation that was not sound or movement, but a fundamental wrongness. The stars on the viewport did not streak. They twisted. The fabric of reality seemed to fold in on itself for a fraction of a second, a nauseating, dimensionless lurch. Then, it was over. We were in a different part of space, and directly ahead, caught completely by surprise, was the silent admonition. Before its crew could even react, before their primitive logic engines could process the impossibility of what had just happened, Thorn gave the order. Fire one remembrance torpedo. He did not shout. His voice was a cold, quiet sentence of death. From a bay in our bow, a single black projectile launched. It did not explode. As it neared the Lumini ship, it fractured, dissolving into a shimmering cloud of psychic energy, the digitized, screaming memory of a single soul harvested from Earth. The cloud washed over the silent admonition. On our screens, we saw the ship's systems flicker and die. Its lights went out. The Lumani, a species that had suppressed its own emotional evolution, had no defense against a direct, weaponized infusion of pure, undiluted human terror and rage. Their minds, for a single, horrific moment, were connected to the agony of our fall, and then they were silent. Their life signs are gone, Rostva reported, a note of awe in her voice. The ship is a tomb. We left it there, a derelict filled with dead-eyed corpses, a silent testament to our return, and continued our journey to the Citadel. Our arrival was not an attack. It was a pronouncement. We jumped into high orbit, the colossal, black, scarred form of the Mnemosyne appearing in the skies above the gleaming, perfect station. Panic erupted. Ships fled. The Citadel's small defense fleet, accustomed to a peace kept by lies, was in disarray. We ignored them. I opened a channel, not to the Citadel's leadership, but to every terminal, every datapad, every public screen in the station, and across the entire Galactic network. The face that appeared on those screens was not mine, not Thorn's. It was a composite, a shifting, holographic face made from the visages of the 100,000 souls in the core. It was the face of a species, weary, ancient, and filled with a terrible, righteous anger. You have curated a lie. Our collective voice spoke, echoing in a billion places at once. You have built a galactic peace upon a foundation of our bones. We, the people of the Terran Dominion, have returned, not for vengeance, but for the truth. Then, we opened the archives. We didn't fire a weapon. We fired the truth. A focused data burst containing the entirety of the Mnemosyne's records, the Lumini harvest, the political betrayals, the uncensored history of our fall, shot from our ship and slammed into the Citadel's core memory. The station's own systems, designed to preserve and disseminate information, became our weapon. The truth, raw and undeniable, flooded the galactic networks. The lie was broken. The response was a stunned, horrified silence, followed by chaos. The Lumani hegemony declared us terrorists, claiming the data was a fabrication, a virus. But it was too late. Other species, those who had been their allies in our destruction, saw their own complicity laid bare, alliances fractured, governments fell. The sterile, orderly peace of the galaxy shattered. Our war was not fought with fleets, but with memory. In the cycles that followed, we became a specter, a ghost fleet of one. The Mnemosyne would appear without warning above a world, not to attack, but to deliver judgment. For a planet whose leaders had been architects of the harvest, We would broadcast the screams of the souls they had condemned. For a species that had profited from our extinction, we would transmit the schematics of the weapons they had used against us. We held a mirror up to the galaxy, and it was horrified by its own reflection. The end came not in a climactic battle, but in a quiet, final confrontation. The remnants of the Lumani hegemony, their empire crumbling, agreed to a summit. It was held in the ruins of the Orion's Anvil asteroid field, the graveyard where I had once fled for my life. I went alone, not in a golem body, but as a holographic projection from the bridge of the Mnemosyne, which waited, silent and watchful, in the darkness. The Lumani envoy was the curator, Index 13, its light form flickering, its usual placidity replaced with something akin to desperation. This chaos cannot continue. It resonated in my mind. You have destabilized millennia of order for the sake of a dead history. History is never dead, I replied, my voice now the calm, steady voice of the arbiter. It simply sleeps, and ours has woken up. You did not just kill us. You stole our future, and in doing so, you poisoned your own. What do you want? The curator asked, the first honest question it had ever posed. Do you intend to exterminate us as we did you? Will you take our place as the galaxy's monsters? I looked past its shimmering form to the silent, shattered wrecks of the ancient war that surrounded us. This was a place of endings. It was time for a new beginning. No, I said, we will not become you. That is not justice. That is just a turning of the wheel. I delivered our terms. The Lumani would confess their crimes, publicly and without reservation. They would dismantle their hegemony and release the stolen psychic energy they held in their matrices, letting the echoes of our dead finally rest. They would open their archives, their technology, their very society to galactic oversight. They would not be destroyed. They would be remembered for what they were. And what of you? Index 13 asked. What will humanity do now? We will watch, I said. We will be the galaxy's memory. We will ensure that no one is ever erased again. And so, the war ended. The Mnemosyne, its primary mission complete, did not settle on a new homeworld. It became a wanderer, a silent guardian patrolling the pathways of the galaxy. We, the reborn, became the keepers of the true history. Our ship a living library and a constant, silent warning. I, Elara, the last archivist, had become the first of a new order, a species not of conquerors, but of witnesses. We had not come back for revenge. We had come back to remember. And in doing so, we taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all, that the dust of dead stars never truly settles, and the ghosts of the past will always, eventually, come home.